And as a reminder, of course, I remind you guys again on Thursday as well. But as a reminder, you have another cram course this Saturday, should you choose to attend. This Saturday is, gosh, y'all, tomorrow's March. What happened? So this one is March 4th on Saturday. This is with a different instructor. So, you know, it kind of worked out that Annie wasn't able to do the 25th after all. So now you have a couple of different perspectives. So Annie's doing your cram course this Saturday. It's 9 to 5. Same thing. It's optional, not required. Go as you please, as you can. Lane will send you guys the email Friday morning with Annie's Zoom link. So same thing as before, just another opportunity for you. Questions? Final exam is the second, I'm sorry, the 9th. Whoa, sorry. Final exam is the 9th, and then your retake is March 13th, if you're eligible. Good morning. Question comes in, do you have a practice final exam available? You do. I was going to talk to you guys about this later Thursday, but since it came up, we'll do it now. So if you look at the online learning system, under the 100% review, you have an exam problem topic. I'm sorry, final practice exam. There it is, final practice exam, which is like a flat PDF. So you can sit down and take it. And of course, the answer choices are here. And then you have another practice exam in class marker. So the same format that you guys took your midterm in, the same format you will take your final exam. So both of these, again, these are under the 100% material. And then you have another one in your book, a comprehensive exam on page 819. 819. So, you know, understanding we got more to cover this week, but if you guys want to start looking at these comprehensive exams, you got 2 in the online learning system and 1 in your book on page 819. I wish you would have reached out to us. Make sure you do this Friday if you don't get it for Saturday's cram course. If you don't get the email from Lane Friday morning, please reach out to one of us Friday afternoon, Friday evening. Check your spam too. I don't know why, but sometimes we wind up in your spam. Please never hesitate to reach out to us. Practice exam is one time only. That I'm not sure about, but it does say you need to take it in one sitting. So I would allow, you know, a couple hours, take it like a real test. Guys, we're to the point now, any quiz you take should be taken like a real test, because in a couple weeks, that's what you'll be doing. So 2 comprehensive exams and 100% material in the online learning system, and then 1 on page 819 of your book. Cram course on Saturday. Other questions about anything? Free licensing related? Okay. So we jump up back into investor math. Isn't this a heck of a way to start the week? But, you know, good news is when we're done with investor math, we're putting our calculator down in class. So this is our last little piece of math. We got a formula to go over, but not so much the math. So our investor math, we're finishing up unit 12. And the one piece of the investor math that we looked at last week was the amount made as part of your amount paid. And we did a couple practice problems on this one, so I'm just recapping real quick. When you're asked for percent of profit or percent of loss, you're looking at the number on top is your amount made. Remember, your amount made is the difference in what you paid for it versus what you sold it for. What you're looking for is what you made or lost. So if you sold it for less than you paid for it, you had a loss. If you sold it for more than what you paid for it, then you have a profit. And these questions are looking for percent of profit. So we're looking at the amount made, the difference in what you paid for it versus what you sold it for, as part of your amount paid, which was your original cost. So again, this is the one we did. I guess that was Thursday, whenever we saw each other last. So now we're going to talk about more investor math. And we got present value as part of original value. Present value is what it is worth today or what it will be worth in the future, depending on how the problem's worded. Original value is what you paid for it. So present value is what it's worth today or what it will be worth. Original value is what you paid for it. And what we're looking for with these problems is percent of seller's cost. And we're going to talk about what that percent of seller's cost means in just 1 second. I just want to make sure you guys have this jotted down. So present value is part of original value. We got this piece. This is your formula. Present value is part of original. So let's talk about what this percent of seller's cost means. And when we're talking about percent of seller's cost, we're going to shake things up just a bit. When we think about percentage when doing these problems, we're always going to think of 100% as our starting point. If you have a profit, you're going to add to 100%. If you have a loss, you're going to deduct from 100%. 100% is your original value. That's what you put into it when you purchase the property. So if you have 100, because you're starting at 100%, your original value is the starting point. So if you have a profit, the percent of seller's cost is going to be more than 100. We're going to add to 100%. If you have a loss, your percent of seller's cost is going to be less than 100%. We're going to deduct. Now we're going to do one of these together, and then I have one for you guys to do on your own. But the trick to these, the key to these, other than the formula, present value is part of original value. Other than the formula, the key to these is thinking at 100 as our starting point. Kind of shakes things up, right? We all were taught to start counting at 0, but not with these. With these, we start at 100. So we ready? We got this? Ready to look? Couple? So doing one together, first problem says a home listed for $285,000, sold for $275,000, and gave the seller a 10% profit over the seller's cost. What was the seller's cost? So we've read the problem. We know we can use a T-bar. And let's start plugging in what we know. So first off, we're looking at present values as part of original value. When I'm talking about value, is that going to be what we list it for or what we sold it for? It's what we sold it for. Does our listing price, does our asking price matter? No. So here's your distractor. So we can go ahead and eliminate that. We want to know they sold it which means the present value was 275. We want to know what was the seller's cost. What did they pay for it? What was their original value? So 275 is our present value. We think of 100 as our starting off point. Start counting at 100. If we have a profit, are we going to have, is our seller's percent of cost going to be more than 100% or less than 100%? Show me thumbs up for more, thumbs down for less. Is my seller's percent of cost going to be more than or less than? So remember, we have a profit. We have a profit. We made money. That's right. That's right. There we go. So we're going to have seller's cost of more than 100%. So if we start counting at 100, we have 100 plus our 10% profit, which gives us the number for the T-bar that we need of 110%. Questions so far? Questions on the number in the T-bar? Numbers. We started at 100, we added 10%, we got percent of seller's cost of 110%. Good morning. The back fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take our present value of 275,000 divided by 110%, and we're going to get our original value. How much did the seller pay for this home? $250,000. Does that show a profit? You paid $250 for it, you sold it for $275. Did you have a profit? We mentioned this last week. You know, most of the time, the math that we do when we use the T-bar, the part is the smaller number. The number on top is a smaller number. But these are the examples of when you may have the bigger number on top. And the reason that you may have the bigger number on top is because my percent is more than 100. So with these problems, these are like the exception to the T-bar rule. T-bar says more often than not, the smaller number goes on top. This is the exception, present value, original value. So anytime your percentage is more than 100, the number on top is going to be bigger. Questions on this one before I let you guys do one? Okay. Here you go. Tell me in a private chat, what did the cabin cost Stacy? Do about 30 more seconds and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So let's see what we got. First, we just read the problem. Stacy invested in a mountain cabin a few years ago and made no improvements to the property. She just sold the cabin for $80,640,000, losing 16% of her investment. What did the cabin cost Stacy? Sometimes just reading the problem and looking at these numbers, we can determine some things before we ever pick up a calculator. So it's part of the reason why I encourage you guys to read the problem first and think it through before you ever put pencil to paper. So let me ask you this. We know Stacy sold it for $80,640, and we know Stacy had a loss. So did she pay more than $80,640 when she bought it, or did she pay less than $80,640? What do you guys think? More than or less than? She paid more than, right? Because she had a loss. So whatever she paid for it, we don't know what she paid for it yet, but we know that it has to be more than $80,640. So right out the gate, if you see an answer choice that is less than $80,640, you can eliminate that one. And the more answer choices, I hope we're seeing some of these test questions, and the more you can eliminate, the better chance you have to get it right. Are you guys seeing there's almost always one that's just so out there, so wrong? Go ahead and eliminate that one. You start with a 25% chance. If you eliminate one, now you got a 33% chance to get it right. Y'all want to go to Vegas this weekend? Well, not this weekend because you got to study, but if we go to Vegas in a couple weeks, you want to go with a 25% chance of winning or a 33% chance of winning? We want to go with a 33% chance, right? So sometimes just looking at the problem, reading the problem and thinking it through. So whatever the answer is, we know it has to be more than 80,640. So if we draw our T-bar, we want to know what the cost was. We want to know Stacy's original value. We know the present value is 80,640. And then to find the percentage of cost, we're going to think of 100 as our starting off point. Start counting at 100. And because Stacy had a loss, this time we're going to start with 100 and deduct. We're going to go this way down our line here. So we start with 100 and then we deduct 16%, which gives us 84%, which is the number we need right here. Questions on so far? Questions so far? How I got the 84%? Back fourth line means divide. So we got 80,640 divided by 84%. Oops, yeah. And that gives me an original cost of $96,000. How much did Stacy pay for it back in the day? She paid $96,000. She suffered a 16% loss. Thus, she sold it for $80,640. Questions on present value, original value, percentage of seller's cost. Good. So do you see where you went wrong? That's my question to you. Good. Perfect. That's how we learn, isn't it? Perfect. And always remember, guys, we're recording. So if you need to go back through at your own pace, and never fear, I got practice for you guys. The more of these you do on your own, it's really easy to watch me, isn't it? You know what I won't be doing during your test? So we got to wean you guys off. We got to get you plenty of practice. We good on this one? Present value, original value? The third piece of investor math is about equity increase or loss. Before we look at this formula, I want to hear from all of you in a private chat. We learned last week, how do we find equity? How do we find equity? I told you this question was coming, so I want to hear from all of you. And you can abbreviate. I know what you speak of. How do we find equity?
Are you just asking in general?
I'm asking how we find equity. There's two pieces to determine equity. And I'm asking in a private chat for you to tell me, what is the formula to find equity? And even if you don't know, tell me you don't know. I really want to hear from all of you. Be a good way for me to take attendance and make sure we're all here paying attention. Is everybody in with something? So now you're here. So equity looks at two pieces. It looks at the difference of value minus debt. Value minus debt gives us equity. Value is what the property is worth. Debt is how much do you owe on the property? What's your mortgage? So the example we gave last week, if you buy a home today and you pay $100,000 for that home today, and let's say you're getting a 10% loan. If you're getting a 10%, no, I'm sorry. Wow, no, why get a loan, right? You're bringing 10%, there we go, to the closing table. You're bringing 10%, which means you're asking the lender for how much? What's your new loan? It's going to be 90% or $90,000. So today the value is $100,000. That's what you paid for it today. You have a debt of $90,000, which is what your loan is, which means your equity today, the day you build the house, is $10,000. Isn't that nice? As long as you bring money to the table, you have equity in your home. As time goes on, last week we talked about equity buildup and how you build that $10,000, how you increase that $10,000, all revolves around increasing your value or decreasing your debt. So obviously, how do we decrease our debt? That's the easy one. How do we decrease our debt? You send that mortgage payment in every month, don't you? Every time you send that in, remember the principal, what you apply to the principal is what reduces your balance. So your principal is how we can, making that payment, is how we can reduce our debt. The other way we have equity buildup is to increase our value. And there's two things we can do to increase our value. We can hope for the neighborhood, for the area to appreciate. Appreciate means an increase in value. We talked about depreciate. So depreciation is a loss. Appreciation is a gain in value. The other way we can increase our value is by capital improvement. Capital improvement is not putting down new carpet. Capital improvement is adding value. The best way, the easiest way to add value is add livable square footage. So you finish the unfinished basement, or you build an extra room in the back of the house. So whenever we talk about equity, it revolves around two pieces: value minus debt. Questions on that before we look at our actual formula? So the formula for our equity increase, obviously with these, we're going to have to find equity. So value minus debt. Everybody have that written down? Value minus debt. So now that we know how to find equity, with these, we're looking at your change in equity. What was your old equity compared to your new equity? What was the equity back in the day when you bought it versus what it's worth today? Our change in equity is going to be part of our original equity. What was your equity when you bought it? And that's going to give you your percent of equity increase or decrease if you have a loss. If you saw the amount made as part of the amount paid formula, we're saying the same thing. The change in equity goes on top, compare it to our original equity. So we're looking for the difference of our equities. We're going to compare the difference of our equities to our original equity. What was our equity when we bought it? So change in equity is part of our original equity. Again, we're going to do one of these together, and then I'll turn you guys loose, let you do one, and then I'll show you where you guys can get practice on these. You're good. Thank you. We have this written down. We know how to solve for equity. So this says a property is valued today at $50,000 and it has an outstanding loan of $45,000. Later, the property is valued at $60,000. The loan is paid down to $38,000. What is the percentage of equity increase? These are going to be multi-step problems, which means there are several things that we have to do. And a lot of times with math, particularly with multi-step problems, I like to start with where I want to end, meaning I want to start with identifying my X. What am I solving for? What is my only focus in this problem? The only thing I care about in this problem is the percentage of equity increase. So let's first look at our equities. So we have value today. We have new equity of $50,000. I'm sorry, new value of $50,000 with a debt of $45,000, which means your original, I think I said new equity, I apologize. Your original equity is $5,000. We found the difference in equities value today, $50,000 value, $45,000 debt. So how much equity do I have in this home today? $5,000, value minus debt. And this is my original equity. Put that up there. Now we're going to find our new equity. So later, the value's gone up to 60,000. And my debt has been paid down to 38,000. So again, just solving for equity, when I look for the difference in the two, I'm getting new equity of $22,000. So I have my original equity of 5,000. I have my new equity of 22,000. Questions on how I got equities? Value minus debt. So back to my T-bar, filling in what I can as I can. The number that goes on bottom is my original equity. So we know that number is 5,000. The number that goes on top is the difference in my equities. So I have an equity of 5,000. I have an equity of 22,000. My difference in equities is 17,000. The change in equity, the difference in equity. Compare my new equity to my original equity. That fourth line in the T-bar means divide. So we take 17,000 divided by 5,000. I get a rate of 3.4. When I move my decimal over 2 places, we get a percentage of equity of $340,000. We just converted rate to percent by moving our decimal over 2 places. So what's your percent of equity increase? $340,000. Change in equity as part of our original equity. Questions on this one? I'm getting ready to let you do one on your own, of course. It's no fun just for me to do it. I got to share the fun. Find the change of equities first. And then look at your difference of equity as part of your original equity. It's not 3.4%. It's either a rate, your calculator gives you a rate. Convert a rate to a percent by moving your decimal over 2 places. 3.4 rate is not the same thing as 3.4%. And guys, your test, all 4 answer choices are going to be a rate or percent. They're not going to give you both. So you're going to solve for rate or percent. But you need to remember from your calculator, once you get that rate, to move that decimal over 2 places to get a percent. We good? We ready to do one on our own? Yay. All right. Tell me in a private chat, what is McKinsey's percent of equity? About 30 more seconds. Okay. So Mackenzie bought a home 5 years ago for 220,000 with a loan of 176. Now the home is worth 260. Her loan is down to 162. What is her percent of equity increase? So we know our formula, and we know our formula includes a T-bar. So let's go ahead and throw down a T-bar and identify our X. So we know what we're shooting for. Now we got to find some equities, don't we? So she bought the home 5 years ago. Her original equity was 220,000. She had a loan of 176. So to find equity, we take value minus debt. So her original equity was $44,000. Value minus debt. So her original equity, when she bought the home, she had $44,000 of equity in it. Now, her new equity, the home has seen an increase in value and a decrease in debt, thus her equity is going to be up. So her new value is 260,000. Her new debt is 162,000, which gives us new equity of $98,000. Questions on how we found the equities, original equity and new equity. Back to our T-bar, we know we need our original value. That's the number that goes on bottom. The number that goes on top is our change in equities, the difference in equities. So when we take 98,000 minus 44,000, we get a change or a difference in 54,000. Again, stopping and checking ourselves. We now have our T-bar complete. We see the number on top is bigger than the number on bottom. Is my answer going to be more than 100% or less than 100%? It's going to be more than. That's what it means when the number on top of the T-bar is bigger than the number on bottom. It means my X is more than 100%. That fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take 54,000, divide it by 44,000. My calculator gives me a rate of 1.2272. I might have rounded there a little bit. Move that decimal over 2 places to get about 122.72%, 123. Again, you can't miss by rounding alone. And guys, what I mean by that, answer choice A isn't going to be 123%, and you're not going to have another answer choice B of 122.72. Right? They're going to give you one or the other. The suggestion is you go out at least 3 decimal places when you round. I say the fewer times you clear your calculator, the best. So if you can do the next calculation without clearing it, and that just eliminates human error. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I got big old clunky fingers and they get in my way. So the fewer times you can touch your calculator, the best. 122, 123%. Equity increase. Questions? Okay. That gets us through investor math and officially gets us through unit 12. Turn with me, if you will, real quick to page 474. 474. Numbers 15, 16, and 17 are investor math. They just happen to be in unit 18. I just want to make sure that we see 15, 16, and 17 on page 474. And then you have those 50 problems in the back of the book, starting on page 803. These are the numbers that relate to the math that we just did, our investor math. You got these jotted down? Are these numbers? We go out to our online learning system under the unit 12 material. There is some more practice, profit and loss and equity math. So here's some extra practice for you guys as well. And yes, I have the solutions for you. But studying the solutions isn't going to help. You know how to do it. Of course, if you get stuck, you can reach out to me. And don't forget too, under the math, we got this math workbook. And not only does this give us the math you can expect to see on my test, the math you can expect to see on your state exam, but it also gives you the math that we've done in this class. It gives you another explanation with some additional practice problems. So our investor math is also covered in this math workbook. So plenty of practice between the textbook, the online learning system, and the math workbook. Have you guys looked at the math workbook yet? Few of you? It's good. If you're struggling with a piece of math, come here and see if a different explanation, a different way of saying it can help it click. Again, you guys, the math alone can't fail you. I want to say there's 8 math questions on your state exam. There's either 8 or 10 on mine. I don't remember. But in other words, you can get it all wrong and still pass the test. But if you can get some of the math, that'll help. You may give you that few extra points. If math isn't your thing, just focus on some of it. Try to get commission and seller net, for example. If math isn't your thing, please don't spend all your study time on the math. You get the math right, but you fail agency. There's more agency than math. Does this make sense? It's about the weight. And what do we know about units 7, 8, 9, and 10? Way more important than math. Yes. Had a pre-licensing student tell me once that I had her waking up in the middle of the night talking about 7, 8, 9, and 10. I said, perfect. That's exactly where I need you to be. Yeah, she passed. I'm just saying. Questions? Okay, I know we're a few minutes early, but I don't want to start a topic and then have to stop. So let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're getting into fair housing. We're back. All right. Let's take attendance. We are jumping into Unit 19. Unit 19 is fair housing. We're starting on page 475. Unit 19 is not only important for your exam, it's also important for your future real estate career, that we understand fair housing. There's a federal level, there's a state level. We'll talk about both of those and what that means for us. Guys, when it comes to fair housing doesn't, fair housing isn't here for us to agree with or disagree with. Fair housing is what it is. It's important that we understand, again, for our career. I don't know much that can get you in trouble faster than a violation of fair housing, not just with the real estate commission, but also with the courts, the enforcement agencies. So our roadmap for this unit, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, what that means, and how federal fair housing came into play. We're going to list and define the classes of the protected classes. So who is protected from discrimination in housing? And then we're going to talk about enforcement. How is fair housing enforced federally and on the state level? We've got several things to look at. So when it comes to fair housing, equal opportunity in housing, the whole purpose, the big picture, if you will, of fair housing, the big picture of fair housing says that anybody shall have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it's within their financial means. That's why they're protected classes. So the whole purpose is to create this fair marketplace, as long as it's within your financial means, regardless of the categories, the protected classes, which we're looking at and defining in just a second. And as we've mentioned, failure to comply with fair housing, real estate commission may take action, the courts may take action. When it comes to equal opportunity in housing, obviously the real estate agents, the real estate firms are expected to comply. That's why we're having this conversation. But also your apartment management companies, any lending agency, builders, developers, basically any phase in the real estate transaction has to comply with equal opportunity in housing. And please note the word housing. We're actually going to define that word in just a minute. But housing says we're referring to the dwelling, the unit, the place where people live. So let's start with a little history lesson. Let's go back in time, way back in time. And let's start with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. What was happening? What was going on in 1866? Wasn't the Civil War ending? Things were changing, the country was changing. And one thing we got from the end of this period of time was the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This act is unique for a couple reasons. One, because this is one that's still enforced today. Civil Rights Act of 1866 is still around today. And what the Civil Rights Act of 1866 says that we will not discriminate on the basis of race or color. Again, we're going to define the protected classes in just one second. So in 1866, and the other thing that makes this act unique, this is not just about housing. This is about commercial, residential, employment, a pickup game of dodgeball. What? The Civil Rights Act applies to anything. There are no exemptions allowed. We can never, for anything, discriminate on the basis of race or color. So still enforceable today, not just about housing, any aspects of our lives. That's what the Civil Rights Act of 1866 gave us. So now let's fast forward. Actually, we're going to fast forward like 100 years. So now we fast forward to 1968. And our Civil Rights Act of 1866 evolved. In 1968, fair housing grew. Race and color are now still protected. In 1968, we got federal fair housing, also known as Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So in 1968, we added to race and color. And as of 1968, now a protected class is religion and national origin. Again, we will define these in just one second. 1866 was race and color. 1968, we added religion and national origin. Fast forward one more time, two more times actually. First stop is 1974, when we added sex as a protected class. I'll talk more about sex and all these in just a second. So 1974, we added sex. And then in 1988, handicap, disability conditions were added, as well as familia status. I think you guys need to know the years that these classes became protected. I think you need to know that sex became a protected class in 1974, for example. And here's why. I would not put it past them on your test to give you a problem that says the year is 1972, and a woman feels that she was denied an apartment application because she was a female. Well, in 1972, was there anything she could do about it? Could she be denied living because she was a female in 1972? Absolutely, because sex wasn't protected until 74. There's a great chart in your book on page 477. And what this chart does is it gives us the acts and the years and what was protected when. So again, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 covered race and color. In 1968, we took race and color and we evolved to religion and national origin, picked up sex in 74, and handicap, disability, and familial status in 1988. The last one you see there, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, when you guys see the word credit, think about the lender. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act are the lender's protected classes. And what that does is gives us a very nice side-by-side comparison. As you can see, the lender's protected classes are awfully similar to ours. There are some differences. The lender cannot discriminate against race, color, religion, national origin, sex. The lender cannot discriminate against age as long as the applicant is 18 years old. The lender cannot discriminate against marital status or public assistance income. Again, I think the chart gives us a really good visual of what was protected when, and we can compare that to the lender's protected classes. So we told you when the protected classes came to be. when they became to be protected. So now let's define what the protected classes are. And one way we can remember those protected classes by remembering Fred's corn. You can put these all together. If we can remember Fred's corn, it'll help us to remember the protected classes. First one in Fred's corn is familia status. Familia status is about the children. Those under the age of 18 are protected. This does include pregnant women. So in other words, we cannot deny somebody housing because they have kids. Children are a protected class. So our F is familia status. It's about the children. I will talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We're just defining things right now. The first R in Fred's is race. This is the group of people that an individual was born into or has affiliated with their entire lives. So whomever you were born into or affiliate with, that defines your race. E is not a protected class. I just needed a filler so I could spell Fred's. So if you don't want to remember the E, E, equal rights for all. The D in Fred's is disability, may also refer to handicap conditions. I would write down both, handicap and disability. Some people say handicap, some people say disability. So knowing that when we say one, we're meaning both handicap and disability. This is just any physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's activities. So any physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's activities. You guys remember in Unit 7 when we talked about things that are material facts and we talked about things that are not material facts. And one thing that is not a material fact is stigmatized properties. So if we're asked, or let me rephrase that, when we are asked, did somebody ever die in this home? We can either volunteer the information, we can hide behind state law. It's not a material law. We don't have to disclose it. There is one exception to that rule. Does anybody remember what the exception to stigmatized properties? Yeah. For stigmatized properties under the category, I should be more specific, I'm sorry, under disability and handicap, if you're ever asked, did somebody ever live in this home that had AIDS or HIV? Your answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. Federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. I don't care if you know or not. Your answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. Those with AIDS or HIV are protected under disability handicap condition. I get asked all the time, have you ever been asked that? No, I've never been asked that. But you know what? If I am, I now know my only response. You guys with me? The only acceptable response is federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. We'll talk a little bit more about handicap disability again in just a second. The S under Fred stands for sex. That's referring to somebody's gender. As of February 2021, included under gender is now gender identity and sexual orientation. So if you guys will look at your book on page 477. Under sex, do you see where it says does not protect sexual orientation or gender identity? Cross that out. We've evolved again. As our society continues to grow, as our culture evolves, so will fair housing. So as of February 21, sexual orientation and gender identity are now protected class under the category of sex. The C in corn is color. That's referring to the actual color of a person's skin. Again, the O is not a protected class. It's just there as a filler. Opportunity for all. Religion is referring to an individual's spiritual beliefs. And then national origin is the country in which an individual was born or where their direct ancestors came from. So national origin refers to where an individual was born or where their direct ancestors hail from. So fair housing gives us this list. Fred's corn. You may see fresh corn. Again, the difference is whether or not the instructor uses disability or handicap. So please make sure we understand that disability, handicap are covered under the same. This is what fair housing says about the protected classes, and this is important. Fair housing does not say these are the protected classes, do not say anything bad about them. What fair housing says is these are the protected classes, don't say anything at all. Remember when we were talking about dual agency or just agency? We said we can talk about the property all day long. The amenities of the property, the neighborhood, the location. We cannot talk about the people. And that's what fair housing says. Even though you may be saying something good about a protected class, it's still a violation of fair housing. These classes are protected, which means we can't say anything at all. So let me ask you guys this. If there's a class, let's say, for example, political views. Is a person's political views protected under fair housing? Technically, could you discriminate on somebody based on their political views? Yeah, political views are not protected, not protected. My husband sent me a home for sale in California roughly 8 years ago. These things always happen in California, don't they? And the advertising in the home for sale said, Trump supporters not welcome. Did that homeowner violate fair housing? No, because political view is not a protected class. Now, did that homeowner limit her pool of buyers? Yeah. Even Trump supporters may be like, I don't want to work with this chick. Are you kidding me? But there was no violation of fair housing. What if you have an apartment for rent and you don't want to rent to real estate agents? Because let's face it, we don't get paid every other week. Could you say real estate agents need not apply? Sure. Because job, employment, career is not a protected class. Everybody hear what I'm saying? These are the protected classes. Now, does it look bad on you if you try to discriminate for anything, political views, employment? Of course. Fair housing only cares about Fred's corn. So when we're dealing with lease or sale, remember, when we refer to housing, we're talking about where the individual is living. When we're dealing with lease or sale, we cannot protect about the classes. Again, we're going to expand on a few of these definitions in just a second. But what questions do I have so far? Can you say only selling or leasing to military personnel? Sure, because military, non-military is not a protected class. Remember too, with familiar status, we said that children, right? So once you turn 18, can we discriminate you based on your age? Can we say you're only 19? I'm not going to let you rent this apartment. The only age thing protected is those under 18. One thing I like about this unit, some other resources I have for you guys is scenarios. Because I think it's really easy to look at Fred's Corn and say, yeah, I got it. But when you actually see some of these scenarios that I'll introduce you guys to, I think those are what really helps. So we'll point those out as we go. And then I got some stuff in the online learning system for you. So again, our equal opportunity in housing, fair housing is covered under HUD. We're going to talk about enforcement for fair housing in just a second. Right now, let's just know that our equal opportunity in housing is covered under HUD. And one thing that HUD requires is any real estate firm, model home, like for a new construction community, lender's office, builder's office, any place that the public is welcome needs to have the equal opportunity housing poster visible to the public when they walk in the front door. And an example of this poster is on page 478. So HUD requires anywhere that the public, any real estate firm, lender's office, where the public can access, have their equal housing opportunity poster on display. As a matter of fact, HUD feels so strongly about this poster on 478. HUD says failure to put the poster up is considered discrimination. Failure to tell the public that we're not going to discriminate is considered a form of discrimination. There's some good on page 479. There's some good prohibited by Fair Housing Acts and some examples. Again, I think some of these scenarios and examples helps you guys understand it on a deeper level. And then at the bottom of page 479, we do some expanded definitions. As we said earlier, housing is referring to the dwelling. It's the space designed for occupancy. It's the space designed for residence. Is this a home for sale or a home for lease? Familiar status, we said, refers to children, those under 18 and pregnant women. I think, and it does come up in for sale, but I think familiar status comes up more in for lease situations. A lot of landlords, for example, may think they don't want to rent to families with kids because, you know, kids like destroy stuff, right? They like tear stuff out and they put purple crayon on the walls and right. They do all that stuff. That's like a landlord's nightmare. That's why they're protected. A family cannot be denied housing because they have children. There's a good example. Let's say you're an apartment manager And let's say you have one of these really big apartment buildings in like downtown somewhere, and you have a family that has, two married people that have, I don't know, 3 kids under the age of 5. And they come in and they apply for an apartment on the 19th floor. As long as their finances are in line, can you deny that family with 3 children under 5 to live on the 19th floor? But wouldn't it be safer not to have 3 kids up on the 19th floor? So aren't we doing what's best for the children in this case? Not according to fair housing. Remember, the big picture says anybody, everybody should have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it's within their financial means. So if you're the apartment manager, you can show them stuff on the first floor. You can show them stuff on every floor in between. But ultimately, if they qualify and they want that 19th floor with 3 young kids, we cannot deny them that housing. I think as the apartment manager, I'd run up there real quick and make sure my balcony was secure, right? And make sure everything up there was good. No big gaps, check all that out. But you guys are with me, right? Even though we may think we're doing what's best in this case for the children, we don't really know. Are we their parents? No. And fair housing says everybody should have the right to live wherever they want. May that be the 19th floor. Familiar status does come up quite a bit with for sale as well, but it's a different situation with for sale. With for sale, you're going to be asked, are there kids that live in the neighborhood? Are there kids that live nearby? And I get it. Buyers want to know if little Johnny has somebody to play with. Answering that question, yes or no, would be a violation of fair housing. Guys, here's the deal. Fair housing does not tell us to ignore questions. Fair housing does not tell us to put our head in the sand and not even address it. Fair housing says, look, this is our act. This is our rule. Put this on us. So when you're looking with buyers and they say, are there kids that live in the neighborhood? Don't ignore it, address it. And instead of talking about the people, the children that are protected, can't we talk about the school district that this property is in? Can't we talk about nearby parks or playgrounds? Would that be a good indication that there are kids nearby if there's a playground, a non-overgrown playground at the end of the street? You guys with me? So we talk about the location. We talk about the amenities. Look, there's a daycare right there. We can talk about the location and the amenities nearby. We cannot talk about the people. So is there a park nearby? Are there things? And guys, always remember too, we're encouraging our buyers, once we go under contract especially, we're encouraging our buyers to drive by the house different days, different times of the day. We want them to go by at 6 o'clock in the morning and see what it looks like. We want them to go by at 10 o'clock on a Friday night and see if this is a party neighborhood, right? We want them to see the neighborhood. And if they're driving by enough, they're going to see kids or not, if there are kids in the neighborhood. But again, don't ignore it. A big part of our job as brokers is to help educate the public. And when we're educating the public, fair housing is probably one of the bigger areas that the public needs educated. So when your buyer says, are there kids that live on the street? Well, fair housing says that we can't really address that. Quite frankly, I may or may not know, right? I've probably seen this neighborhood the first time as well as you have. But what we can do is redirect their question. What's important to you? Do you want good schools? Do you want parks? Do you want amenities for your kids? The other expanded definition is handicap disability status. And again, this applies more to the for lease scenario than the for sale. landlords need to allow tenants with disabilities to make accommodations to the dwelling to accommodate their disability. So if you have somebody applying for an apartment or a home, let's say, and they're in a wheelchair and they want to put a ramp to the front door, or maybe they want to lower the kitchen cabinets, the landlord cannot say no. The landlord cannot deny a tenant with a disability from making accommodations to their property. Now, here's the deal. The landlord does not have to pay for these accommodations. They can require the tenant to pay. And there are resources out there for the tenant. And at the end of the lease, if it's in the lease, the landlord can require the tenant to put the home back to its original condition. So raise the cabinets, remove the ramp. Do we install grab bars in the shower, for example? The only thing in this scenario that the landlord cannot do is say no. They cannot deny the tenant from making accommodations, the tenant with a disability or handicap, from making accommodations. We talked last week about service animals. Again, a service animal, a tenant with a service animal cannot be denied. The landlord has to allow. They can charge or for the service animal, they cannot charge a pet fee. We're going to do a nice side-by-side comparison of fair housing and ADA, American with Disability Act, in just a minute. There's also in your book on page 480 under the in practice. Also under handicap disability, those are currently in a recovery program from legal or illegal substances are covered, are protected under handicap disability. Users are not, but those in a recovery program are protected under fair housing. Questions? A person who owns several properties, they required to know this before renting to tenants. They should. They should. We're going to talk about selling or renting for yourself in just a second. That is also covered under fair housing. So, right, you're doing it for yourself. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Good so far? So with fair housing, there are some exemptions. There are some exemptions. To the question that was just asked, someone that does not own more than 3 homes at a time. So if you own 2 or 3 properties and you're going to live in one and rent 2, you don't have to follow fair housing. Now, if you own 4 or more, now you have to follow fair housing. So to answer your question a few minutes ago, Toya, the answer is it depends. How many properties do you own? Guys, what we're trying to do here with the less than 3 homes is, for example, the for sale by owner or the for rent by owner. As long as you don't own more than 3 properties, you're exempt from fair housing. This is what we need to all understand, though. Anytime you bring a real estate agent into the transaction, there are no exemptions to that. So if you want to hire a property management, but you only have 2 apartments or 2 homes to rent, you have to follow fair housing because you brought an agent into the mix. If you're for sale by owner, you didn't hire an agent, did you? So for sale by owner, you could technically discriminate, right? But what if the buyer comes with an agent? Now there's a real estate agent involved in the transaction. Once we get involved, discrimination out the window of any form. And the other thing that nobody can do, agents or non-licensees, we can never advertise our discrimination. So let's say, for example, you have an apartment to rent and you've decided you only want to rent, it's yours, you own it. And you've decided that you only want to rent to females. You can choose females only. You cannot advertise that discrimination. You cannot say in the ad, men need not apply. So even though you may fall under this category where you're exempt, you still cannot advertise your discrimination. Do we see this violated on the regular? I mean, we pick up Craigslist and that's usually what we see, females only, or just because we see it on Craigslist, y'all, doesn't mean that it's right. Fair Housing says discriminatory advertising is never allowed by anybody. Some other exemptions: in a rental of an owner occupied 1 to 4 family dwelling. So let's say you own a duplex and you're going to live in one of the units and you're going to rent the other unit. You can choose who is going to live in that other unit. Do you want females? Again, you just can't advertise your discrimination. You cannot say females only. But you can, if you live there, you can be selective about who occupies the other unit or units. Any property owned by a religious organization, the religious organization can choose to only allow their members to occupy the property. Think of like a church parsonage, for example. Same thing with private clubs. If a private clubs own a property, they can limit that use only to their members. They can say members only can use this property or can live here. And the other exemption is housing for older persons. Let's call these our retirement communities. There are communities designed specifically for those that are 62 or older to live in. This is what we need to understand. The exemption to this one is the children. The exemption to this one is the familial status. We still can't discriminate against race, color, religion, national origin, handicap, etc. The only exemption to housing for older persons, again, because that's why they were designed. They were designed for a retirement community. So because that was their specification, they can say kids can't live here. And they're not even saying that, are they? I mean, if you're in your 40s, you can't live there. What they're saying is, in order to live here, you need to be 62 years old or older. Now, can the kids go visit grandma and grandpa for the weekend? Can they pack their little backpacks and go visit for the weekend? Of course they can. They cannot live here. They cannot have this as their primary dwelling. And again, please hear me. The exemption for housing for older persons is familial status. You still cannot discriminate from race, color, religion, national origin, sex, and handicap, disability. Questions on that? So who enforces federal fair housing? Well, we said it was HUD, but specifically the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity is who enforces fair housing. They do. Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity does run under HUD. If somebody feels that they were discriminated against for housing, the complainant has up to 1 year to file a report with the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. The complainant has 1 year after the discriminatory action to file a complaint. HUD is going to review the case. They're going to dig deep. They're going to ask all the parties questions. Do you think it'd be good to have some kind of documentation if HUD calls and says we're investigating a case? Do you think some kind of a documentation would be helpful for your case? Or shake your head yes, because what do we document? Everything. If HUD determines that discrimination has happened, it has occurred, this could result in a lawsuit in a federal court. It could be looking at civil or criminal penalties. For penalties, you're looking at, just FYI, about $10,000 your first offense, $25,000 your second offense, and $50,000 for any offense over that. Please learn your lesson after the first offense, because those fines just keep going up. Those fees just keep going up. Eventually, they may shut you down. And remember what we said, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission could be cause for disciplinary action as well. Questions on fair housing? Federal fair housing, I should say, federal fair housing. So let's bring this down to the state level. North Carolina also has the North Carolina Fair Housing Act of 1983. We eventually got in the game. A lot of states relate to enact their own fair housing. Here's the good news for North Carolina. In North Carolina, our protected classes are also Fred's Corn. You go to other states, California, I think they have like 15 or 16 protected classes. So California pre-licensing students have to remember what's fair housing and what's California. So is that good news? Fred's Corn applies in North Carolina to both federal and state level. The difference in fair housing in North Carolina, or I should say federal fair housing and North Carolina fair housing, are the exemptions. So we're going to do a side-by-side comparison. So the first exemption we learned about in federal says an exemption is allowed when someone someone does not own more than 3 properties. The state says, yeah, whatever. The state fair housing says the for sale by owner or the for rent by owner is not exempt. So again, Toy, if I can go back to your question, state fair housing, can you discriminate about just one? Can the for rent by owner? And now that we're in North Carolina, the answer is no. That's protected under state. Does that make us feel a little bit better? I tend to get some nasty looks when I tell you if you own 2 properties, you can discriminate. But evidently the state of North Carolina agreed with me because they stepped in and said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. This is the deal, you guys. Put real estate aside for a second. Pretend that it doesn't exist just for 1 second. Anytime you have a conflict of law, like for example, federal versus state, anytime you have a conflict of law, the more restrictive of the two is going to prevail. So because in this case, state is more strict than federal, state wins. So in North Carolina, can the for sale by owner discriminate? No. We need to understand both for your test, what federal exemption is versus a state. So that's one big difference between the two. And if this ever winds up in court, state law will prevail. The other difference in exemptions, in federal, we said we can allow an exemption only if the owner lives in one of the units, 1 to 4 units. Only if the owner lives there. State's not as strict. State allows rental exemptions if the owner or their family member. So if you have a kid going to UNC Wilmington and you want to buy a duplex for your kid to live, because your kid's the family member, you can choose who rents the other unit. Again, if this were to go down in court, federal says only owner, state says owner or their family member. So which one's going to prevail in court? Which one is the judge going to see? In this case, it's the federal because it's the more restrictive. Again, we need to understand both. Anytime you have a conflict of law, anytime you have a conflict of law, the more restrictive of the two will prevail. There is one more state exemption that federal does not have, so there's nothing to compare. State does allow an exemption on single-sex dormitories. So all of our college dorms, for example, military barracks, co-ed dorms are becoming a thing, or have been a thing. They're exempt under state fair housing. Federal has no such exemptions for single-sex dormitories. The other thing we need to know about state fair housing is who enforces it. And this comes from the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. Again, if somebody feels that they were discriminated against for housing, the complainant has up to a year, 1 year after the discrimination to file the complaint. If the complaint is filed at the state level, it very well may be pushed up to the federal level. If the complaint is filed at the federal level, it very well may be pushed down to the state level. Now you got both involved, federal and state, plus the courts, plus the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Is it important that we know Fred's corn? Absolutely. Nope. When anytime, again, you guys, please put real estate aside. Let's just pretend real estate doesn't exist. When you have two conflicting laws, two conflicting pieces of information, the more restrictive of the two will prevail. So I can't say federal is always going to win. We need to look at the two exemptions. We need to see which one's more strict. And that's the one that's going to win out in a court of law. Questions on state fair housing? Okay. Let's take our break. We come back. We're going to keep talking a little bit more about fair housing. we're back. We are taking attendance. Oop, Carrie, I just got you. Sean, oop, got you too. There we go. You guys are good. So we talked about federal fair housing. We talked about state fair housing. Over on page 484, we're going to talk about some fair housing prohibited practices, things that are never ever allowed per fair housing. The first prohibited practice, the first thing not allowed, is called block busting, which is also known as panic peddling. I want you guys to write it down. Block busting is about the sellers or the owners in a property management. Block busting is about the owners for sale or for lease. Block busting is the act of encouraging people to sell or rent their home by claiming that the entry of a protected class into the neighborhood is going to have some type of impact. So block busting is encouraging people to sell or lease their homes by claiming the entry of a protected class into the neighborhood will have some sort of impact on the value. If block busting is about owners for sale or for lease, steering, also known as channeling, is about the buyers or the tenants. Block busting is about the owners. Steering is about the buyers and the tenants. Steering is steering or channeling, directing buyers or tenants into or away from a particular neighborhood because of the presence of a protected class. So steering is about directing buyers or tenants to or away from a certain neighborhood because of the presence or absence of a protected class. Block busting is about the sellers and the owners. Steering is about buyers and tenants. Questions on those? As we said earlier, advertising or discrimination is always a prohibited practice. You may have found that exemption where you're allowed to discriminate. You can't advertise it. This applies to social media, internet too, you guys. It's huge right now on social media. Please don't think that your social media accounts aren't advertising. Any message directed to the public is a form of advertising. If you will, look with me on page 486. 486 is just a sample of some HUDs, some advertising guidelines from HUD. They actually have a whole document. It's like 40 some pages of words that they suggest that we not use in our advertising. So here are just some examples. And I think this is interesting because as we speak, fair housing continues to evolve. Fair housing continues to grow. As I said earlier, as our society changes, as our culture changes, then fair housing needs to keep up with those changes. And if you guys look under the category race, color, religion, and then under permitted, it says master bedroom. As we speak, MLSs across the country are doing away with master bedroom. Triad MLS has already replaced master bedroom with primary bedroom. You may see reference to owner's suite. So again, this is just an example, but this is a good example because this tells us how fair housing is constantly changing, is constantly evolving to keep up with us. Last year, I think it was last year. Yeah, last year, Triad MLS implemented a new software in their system. So when you're typing the remarks or you're typing anything, they have flagged. Remember, I just said HUD has advertising guidelines of like 40 some pages of words that may not be appropriate in advertising guidelines. All those words have been put into this software. And if you put a word in your remarks, it's not going to tell you can't use it, but it's going to flag it. It's going to say, make sure you're using this word appropriately. So for example, I put in all the listings for my firm, and we were putting one in after the software was implemented. And I was putting a listing in that said something about the white kitchen cabinets. And I got a little warning flag that went up. It didn't tell me I couldn't say white kitchen cabinets. It just sent me a warning that said this word white is in our list. Make sure you're using it appropriately. So it didn't deny me, but it did caution me. Make sure you're proceeding with caution. So that was a huge help because let's face it, it's hard to sit down and read 46 pages of just words that you can't use, right? So the new software absolutely has helped. Question comes in an example of block busting. If you tell a seller they better sell because a bunch of Methodists are coming, starting to live on the street. There's a new Methodist church right down the road. And because of that, a lot of Methodists are starting to move in. You should sell your house before this neighborhood is overrun by Methodists. That would be an example of block busting. You're encouraging the buyer, or you're encouraging the seller to sell or rent because of the entry of a protected class. Block busting is about the seller, steering is about the buyer. Discrimination in advertising is never allowed. And then the last prohibited practice is called redlining. And this is about the lender. This is a lender prohibited practice. Redlining is about the lender. Some lenders that used to engage in redlining, this blows my mind, this was a thing. These lenders would take a map of the city and they would put the map of the city on the wall. And then they would take their red marker and they would actually walk up to the map and say, we're not going to originate loans here, here, or here. Nothing to do about the people, nothing to do about the property. They refused to make a mortgage loan based on the neighborhood. Today, that's not allowed. If you're getting denied a home loan, it better be because your debt to income ratio doesn't work out, or the home doesn't meet the appraisal conditions. Remember, we talked about FHA and VA. Homes have a stricter requirement. Again, it's not about the people. So if you're being denied a loan, it can't be because of the neighborhood that it's in. That's redlining. Today, it's not allowed. What did they base the redlining off of? If it wasn't about the people, it was the neighborhood itself. Maybe a deteriorating neighborhood. Maybe a neighborhood with crime, for example. I don't know what their qualifications. Is that not wild to y'all? That blows my mind every single time I say this, and I've said this a lot. but they would actually say, nope, no loans here, period, end of story. Today, not allowed. In North Carolina, we also have some protection for our tenants when they're dealing with landlords, particularly about sexual harassment. There are North Carolina laws to protect the tenant by the landlord. They go on to define the different types of sexual harassment. Verbal harassment is suggestive comments or jokes about a sex or a gender. Nonverbal would be like obscene gestures. And then physical would be inappropriate touching or fondling. Again, tenants are protected in North Carolina. They shouldn't be, they shouldn't have to deal with overt requests or demands for sexual acts by their landlord. So let's bring this home. Let's talk about what Unit 19 means for us, the future brokers. This first one's big. This is why this unit is so important. Brokers can be found guilty of discrimination even if there was no intent to discriminate. You didn't mean to, but somebody still felt that they were discriminated. Please remember, for fair housing, you guys, what we do for one, we do for all. It's really important that you set your policies in place at the beginning. Your firm will help you. And you make sure you follow those policies every single time to make sure you're treating people fairly. If you're going into property management, if you set a policy that says you're going to run a credit background check or a background check for every tenant that applies, then you need to run a background check for every single tenant. If you forget one, that could be seen as a discriminatory act. What if you're going into sales and you're doing an open house on Sunday? And you have your open house registry with a plate of freshly baked cookies in the kitchen. And everybody that walks in the front door, you say, sign my registry and help yourself to a cookie. Sign my registry and help yourself to a cookie. Sign my registry and help yourself to a cookie. And then you're like doing something and a couple comes in and you just say, hey folks, and you don't say, sign my registry and take a cookie. But then they hear you say that to the next couple. Could they feel discriminated against? Because you told everybody else to sign your registry and take a cookie. Could they feel discriminated against? Absolutely. It wasn't your intent, but guess what? It's not about your intent. It's how you made that couple feel. Whether you meant to or not. Everybody have that first bullet point written down, highlighted, star. The intent doesn't matter. It's how you made the person feel. As we said, HUD offers guidelines for us. Last time I looked at that thing, it was like 40 some pages. Thank you, Triad MLS, for putting the software in to flag all those words for me. One thing we'll learn when we get into license law and commission rule on Thursday is that your broker and charges are going to be responsible for all the advertising that comes out of the firm, or under the firm name, I should say. And one thing your BIC is looking for is to make sure that you don't unintentionally have some discriminatory language in there in your advertising. So those guidelines help us make sure that we're in compliance with our advertising. Also for brokers, the National Association of Realtors, along with Equal Opportunity in Housing, says we should display something in our firms that say that we will not discriminate. As we learned in Unit 8 with our musts about our written agency agreements, one of those musts is that all of our agency agreements have the non-discrimination clause. Our listing agreement, our buyer's agency agreement, and our property management agreement. All agency agreements must have the non-discrimination clause. We will go back out to the listing agreement in just a minute and look at that again, now that we know what we know. Page 489 of your book, there's a good in practice with some situations and some responses. Again, I do think Unit 19 has done a good job with helping us with scenarios. I got some more for you guys in the online learning system. And you know, fair housing is one of these things, like we're just starting to introduce you to it. You'll see it again in post-licensing. You'll see it pop up in continuing education. Every once in a while, your firm will offer training on fair housing. It's an ongoing learning and understanding because it does evolve. Remember what we said with familial status and handicap? We didn't get those till 1988. Y'all, that was not that long ago, was it? 1988 was not that long ago. So we continue to evolve, we continue to grow. The National Association of Realtors has designated April as Fair Housing Month. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of NAR in April. A lot of good training opportunities for your firm to take advantage of, to help us make sure we fully understand. We are dealing with the public. We are dealing with the people. And fair housing is there to make sure that we're dealing with them appropriately. Questions? Last week, we introduced you guys the Americans with Disability Act. This week, we introduced you to fair housing. We need to understand the difference. First off, shake your head, yes or no. Does ADA apply to all employers? All employers? I need movement. Does it apply to all employers? No. ADA only applies to employers with 15 or more employees. So if the employer has 15 or more employees, ADA kicks in. ADA is about the public accommodations. Fair housing is the dwelling, the unit. It is so important that we see this difference. ADA is about the public accommodations. Fair housing is about the unit, the dwelling. You get into one of those large apartment complexes, they got to abide by both, assuming they have 15 or more employees, right? They have to abide by both. They have to follow fair housing for the individual units they rent. Plus they have ADA that helps them regulate their common areas wherever the public can access. I had a pre-licensing student a couple years ago. We were still in person or face-to-face. And she worked for one of these large apartment complexes. I think she told us once there's like 175 units. And the poor thing would come to class just frazzled sometimes, especially on the first of the month when rent was due. Could you imagine collecting rent from 175 different tenants? So the poor thing came frazzled. But she told us because her company had more than 15 more employees, she had to follow ADA and fair housing. And guys, they would send secret shoppers. They would have people call and ask questions. They may even have people swing by the office to make sure that they're in compliance. If they found out they weren't in compliance, it's going to depend on how many violations we've had. They probably start with a warning, slap on the wrist. You need to get some more training and make sure you're acting appropriately. After that, they may start slapping fines. However, they need to make sure that the public is protected, both for the common areas and for the housing. Questions on ADA versus fair housing? Remember, we talked earlier about the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Credit tells us this is about the lender. You guys already have this written down. We talked about this in Unit 15. Plus, you have it in that nice little chart at the beginning of Unit 19. 15, we talked about Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Again, this is for the lender. And as we saw earlier, their protected classes are similar, but not the same. Both the lender and the real estate agent have race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. You will note the lender does not have a protected class of familial status or handicap disability. For the lender, when we talk about age as a protected class, that's assuming that the applicant is an adult. They're not a minor. Who we're protecting in this is anybody over 18. In other words, you cannot be denied a loan simply because of your age. So if a 90-year-old applies for a 30-year home loan, they cannot be denied because of their age. Marital status is protected under lender. And then anyone in receipt of public assistance. Again, I really like that chart page back on 477. I think the chart does a nice job of giving us a side-by-side comparison. Questions? The last piece of this unit is talking about our code of ethics. Once you get your license, if you join the National Association of Realtors, joining NAR makes you a realtor. Once you're a realtor, you have a certain code of ethics that you need to follow. We're held to a higher standard, realtors are. Let me make sure I say this one right. All realtors are brokers, but not all brokers are realtors. Did I do that right? All realtors are brokers. That's always one I got to think about. But not all brokers are realtors. So in other words, once you get your license, you become a broker. Then you take it a step further to become a realtor. You become a realtor by joining the National Association of Realtors. Once you're part of NAR, you get code of ethics. When you guys join your firm, they will tell you if they expect you to join NAR or not. If you do, you'll have a new agent orientation from your local board of realtors. And covered in that new agent orientation is the 16 articles of NAR's code of ethics. So you'll get that training soon after you affiliate with your firm. If you don't join NAR, don't worry. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission has adopted many of the NAR's Code of Ethics. NAR requires us to do Code of Ethics training every 3 years. So you get your license, you do Code of Ethics training in your new agent orientation, and then you will do Code of Ethics training every 3 years. The good news is that Code of Ethics training may apply to your CE credit, your continuing education credit. So kind of 2 birds with 1 stone. Funny story. NAR used to require Code of Ethics training every 4 years. A couple years ago, they said, wow, we need to do it more often. So then they changed it to 2. A couple years after that, they decided it was too often. So the Goldilocks is 3. Currently, it's every 3 years we do our Code of Ethics training. Questions? I guess it's through 19. So we got our key terms on page 475. There's that key point review. On page 492, your checklist, if you will. And then you got a student quiz, 494. We go out to our online learning system just for a second. There's some other really good stuff in Unit 19 for you guys, again, to help you better understand fair housing. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission has written a Q&A brochure on fair housing. We've looked at a couple of their other Q&A brochures throughout your online learning system. So this is another one that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission provides. I think this helps you guys better understand it. Keep in mind, these Q&A brochures are geared towards the public, but as you guys are trying to wrap your brains around these, I think these are great brochures to give you another perspective. Also in the online learning system, I provided some case studies. So it gives you like a scenario. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure, right? It gives you a scenario and you decide A, B, C, or D. I do have the study, the explanation of the study, so it does tell you what the right answer is and why. If you're looking at this thinking, gee, it looks like Julie copied it from a book, you'd be absolutely right. And the book that I scanned and uploaded this from is the Real Estate Manual. You guys see this? I know it looks backwards to you. The Real Estate Manual, this is, let's call this the Real Estate Commission's Bible. This is their manual. This is what you're going to use in post-licensing. You can see it's just about as big as your pre-licensing book. Here's the good news. This one book gets you through all 3 post-licensing classes. So we don't have to have one per class. Is that good news? So this one book gets you all 3. Again, this is the basis of your post-licensing. And within this is a chapter 18 on fair housing. So I took what you're looking at, these case studies. These come straight from the manual that comes straight from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. So again, I like these as good examples, case studies. I think it's the scenario that helps you better wrap your brain around this information. I mentioned NAR offers training. Right about the start of the pandemic, they released a simulation. It's like a game And in that simulation, you are the broker of a fictitious town called Fairhaven. And they walk you through several scenarios of working with different members of the public of Fairhaven. And again, it's like a choose your own adventure. They walk you through the scenarios and then you choose how you will respond. I wish I could give you guys access because I think it's a really cool tool, but I'm not giving you my login and password to NAR. So you just need to wait until you get licensed. And then you'll get access once you join Realtors, you'll get licensed access to NAR and you can play the Fairhaven game. But it's really insightful. It's really eye-opening. Question comes in, will these scenarios be in the final test? No, I simply just put these here as a means to help you guys understand and wrap your brain around. Do with them what you choose. The other thing I have in here, remember we said fair housing pops up in CE every once in a while? Well, this was just CE last year, our continuing education class on fair housing. You know, I have the whole 24-page document in here. I don't think you should read the whole document, but again, there's some good scenarios. You see these 4 discussions and it walks you through these scenarios. So, I mean, you're welcome to read the whole thing. I don't think you should waste, spend your time on that. But I do think the scenarios help. So scattered throughout. And then if you go the whole way to the bottom, you'll find the answers for discussions. So you can see, is Ray correct? Why or why not? So again, just tools to help you guys better understand. Do with it what you will. Not only do I have to get you through the test for fair housing, we got to make sure you're prepared to work with the public. We got to make sure you're prepared to work with the buyer and the seller, tenant, landlord. Questions? Anything at all on Unit 19, fair housing? Somebody also has the real estate manual. Good for you. You're a step ahead, assuming that thing doesn't update before you take post licensing. By the way, there is a digital version too. If you go to the Real Estate Commission's website, you can either get the book or get the digital version. Fairly new. I like it a whole lot. You'll really be introduced to the real estate manual and post licensing. Let's call that your carrot. You want to get the post licensing manual or the real estate manual? Let's get you in post licensing. Questions? Okay. Big deep breath. Unit 18, we keep going. Unit 18 is short, sweet, to the point. To get through Unit 18, we need to put on our accountant hat. Do I have any accountants or CPAs on the call? I love some of the looks I get from you guys when I ask. No, Julie. So here's the deal, you guys. When we're working with buyers, sellers, owners, tenants, whatever, we're just another unit just to teach you guys enough to be dangerous. I cannot give out tax advice unless I am current on the tax codes. And guys, doing your own taxes once a year in TurboTax does not make you eligible to give out tax advice to your clients and customers. Fair enough? This is one of those units we're telling you, if you don't know, tell them to call their accountant. So our guide for this class, we're going to talk about some tax benefits, 2 different types of tax benefits that we're going to talk about. Benefits while you own the property and benefits when you sell the property. And then I know that says calculate, but we're going to like calculate with picking a calculator up. So we're going to define these words, and then we are going to put them in a formula. One way or another, we need to be familiar with these words. So some of you see formula mode, some of you see definition. Makes no difference to me as long as we have a general idea of what these words do. So the first section, the first category in this unit are tax benefits for personal residents. You own real property. And as an owner of real property, you may be eligible for some tax deductible expenses. For example, the interest that you pay in each year may be tax deductible. I do not know if yours is or not. Call your accountant. The year you purchase your home, discount points may be tax deductible. Remember what discount points are? Discount points are just prepaid interest. So the year you purchase your home, if you prepay interest, if you purchase any discount points, you may be eligible for some tax deductions. If you have any prepayment penalties on your mortgage, it might be tax deductible. Your mortgage insurance premium, or your MIP, is the financing charge. The origination fee for an FHA loan, that may be tax deductible. And then your loan origination fees may also be tax deductible. When you're working with a first-time buyer, when you're working with any buyer, encourage them to talk to an accountant the year they buy, so they can make sure they're taking advantage of any tax deductions. And then as an owner, real property taxes. Each year's real property taxes may have some tax deductions. This is the other CYA. Call your accountant. Questions on tax benefits for homeowners? The second category in Unit 18 are tax benefits when you sell your real property. So there's tax benefits during the time you own it. And then there could be some tax benefits when you go to sell your real property. So on page 464, we define some words. Capital gain is the amount realized from the sale of the property. How much did you make? You sold your property, you had a gain. It's the amount realized. The cost basis is your initial cost. What did it cost you to purchase this property? So your cost basis is your initial cost. Capital improvements are anything that adds value. Painting a room is not a capital improvement. In order to have a capital improvement, we need to have value. So the best way, the quickest way to add value is to add square footage. Finish the unfinished basement, build a room on the back of the house. The adjusted basis is your cost basis plus your capital improvements. So the adjusted basis looks at what did you pay for the property back in the day, plus what capital improvements did you make while you owned it. Your adjusted basis is your cost basis plus your capital improvements. Your amount realized is what you sell the property for. Amount realized, what did you realize when you sold the property? Adding sunroom is a capital improvement or not? The answer is, it depends. Did you add livable square footage? Remember the three things we need to determine total square footage. Must be finished, directly accessible, and heated by a permanently installed heating system. If it meets all three, the next piece I'm going to tell you is talk to your accountant. So the adjusted basis looks at what you paid for it back in the day, plus the improvements you made. The amount realized is what you sold it for. We're going to put all this into formula in just 1 second. It's like math without picking up a calculator. One way or another, we need to know these words. So either you're good with the definitions on page 464, 465, or we'll see the formulas in just a second. Questions so far? So these tax considerations when selling your property, selling your home, it matters if it's short-term ownership or long-term ownership. Short-term ownership means you own the property 12 months or less. Tax considerations do not apply to short-term ownership. Who is the typical short-term owner? Not all the time, I know, but who is the typical short-term owner, the typical person that owns it for less than 12 months? Yeah. The typical short-term owner are investors, are flippers. This is what they do for a living, right? They go in, they buy a property, they flip it, and they turn around and sell it. They don't get to take these tax considerations when they sell. Their tax benefit is considered their ordinary income because that's what they do for a living. The short term is not eligible for capital gains, which means this conversation is about long-term ownership, meaning you've owned the property for more than 12 months. If you've owned the property for more than 12 months and it's your principal residence, married couple filing jointly can claim up to $500,000 capital gains tax-free. Bear with me, that'll make a lot more sense in just 1 second. Single or married filing separately are eligible of up to $250,000 tax-free. Again, those numbers will make more sense in just 1 second. One of the criteria for these tax considerations when selling is you've had to have occupied the home 2 out of the last 5 years. Those 2 years do not have to be consecutive. As long as the total time adds up to 2 out of the last 5 years, you may be eligible for tax considerations when you sell your principal residence, your primary residence. So we're going to take those words that we just learned, that we just defined, and we're going to see them in a different light. And that different light is in a formula. So we actually have 3 different formulas to find our capital gains taxes. The first is to find our adjusted basis, which you paid for it back in the day. That does include your closing costs, your purchase price, plus your closing costs is your cost basis. Add to that your capital improvements. And that gives you your adjusted basis. So your purchase price and your allowable closing cost is your cost basis. Add to that your capital improvements. And you get your adjusted basis. We'll do something with the adjusted basis in just 1 second. So the adjusted basis looks at what did you pay for it and what did you do to improve it during the time you owned it. Now, if we fast forward, your amount realized is your sales price minus closing costs. The amount realized is your sales price when you go to sell it minus your allowable closing costs gives you your amount realized. And when we compare the two, your adjusted basis as compared to your amount realized, that gives you your capital gain. Your amount realized is what you sold it for. Your adjusted basis is what you paid for it, plus the capital improvements you made. The difference of the two is your capital gain or your loss. I don't think you're going to see math calculations, but we do need to know what those words mean. We do need to know how to arrive to your capital gain. So put your pencils down for a second. Put them down for a second. Y'all make my hand hurt, I swear. All right, so let's just walk through a little scenario together. So your original purchase price was $398,000. You had $1,515 in closing costs. 20 years later, you sold it for $920. You had $600 in closing costs. So first we need to find our cost basis. Had we had capital improvement, then what we would have here is our adjusted basis. However, since we don't have a capital improvement, we have a cost basis, which is our purchase price plus our original closing costs. Now fast forward to when we sell it. You sold it for $920 minus your allowable closing costs. So your amount realized minus your cost basis or your adjusted basis, if you had capital improvements, gives you a capital gain of $519,850. Let's say you're a married couple filing jointly. You have a tax deduction of $500,000, which means you don't have to pay taxes on the full capital gain. You have a tax exemption, in this case, $500,000 because they're married filing jointly. So that has our taxable capital gain down to $19,850. Would you rather pay taxes on $519,000 or $19,000? Let's all agree we'd rather pay taxes on $19,000, right? This is a huge benefit. Your tax exemption is $500,000 filing jointly, or $250 either single or married filing separately. I just made up a tax rate. I'm not an accountant, in no way attesting of the current tax rate. So in this example, we have a tax rate of 15%. which means your capital gain tax bill is $2,977.50. Questions? Also, under the accounting unit, there might be some special rules. There's some special rules for a home office. Part of your home may be tax deductible. If you dedicate space to an office in the home, there are guidelines that you need to know that your accountant will share with you. You guys see my tax write-off right here, like this little corner. This is my home office. All I do back here is work. Not fun back here. That's all. No, I'm just kidding. But this is the portion of my home dedicated for my home office. We're seeing a lot more of this post-pandemic, aren't we? I didn't have a home office before the pandemic. I do now. So if you have a home office, you might be eligible for some tax exemptions, some tax benefits. We talked about installment land contract, installment sales back in Unit 10. If you're in installment sales, both parties may want to talk to their accountant. Somebody's paying taxes, somebody owns the home, somebody's paying installment, making installment payments. So both parties should be encouraged to talk to their accountant, make sure they're taking advantage of their tax benefits. Vacation homes may be eligible for tax deductions, tax benefits. Again, there's rules, talk to your accountant. But if you have a property that's dedicated for others to vacation there, it's a vacation home for others, they may be eligible for certain tax deductions. I know one of the criteria for vacation homes, for example, the owner can't occupy more than 14 days out of the year. So you own a vacation home, but you can only be there for 2 weeks. Questions? We see lots of green stars. Is that a timeshare vacation home? If it falls under the vacation home, if you own it and you rent it out as a vacation home, you may be eligible for tax benefits. So let's go ahead. It's break time. So let's go ahead and take our break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up 18. back. So I am taking attendance. And we're about to wrap up Unit 18. So we talked about some special rules. These apply to you. Call your accountant. Another special rule we have is an investor's tool. This is something the investor can take advantage of. And this is called a tax deferred exchange, also known as an IRS 1031. These are pretty cool. So what this does, it allows the investor to sell an investment property, take the proceeds from the sale of that investment property, and use that money to buy another investment property. And as long as they're selling an investment property to purchase an investment property, they can defer paying taxes on the sale of that investment property. Isn't that pretty cool? And you can keep deferring paying taxes as long as you're in the investment game. So they'll allow you to not pay taxes as long as you're using this money to purchase another investment property. And of course, there are some rules. I think, for example, the investor has to purchase the next investment property within 6 months. They talk about like-kind exchange. This is just real estate for real estate. So if you sell an investment condo, you can use those proceeds to purchase an investment townhome. So it's just real estate for real estate. It's not specific to the type of property. If you are an investor, or if you are working with an investor, definitely want to talk to your accountant. Make sure you're taking advantage of this. Be familiar with the rules. So a 1031 tax deferred exchange, property for property. And one thing that the account looks at, we're trying to determine what's tax benefit, what's tax eligible, what's not. Accountants may often establish a depreciation schedule. We said depreciation is just the loss in value for any reason. So investors may be able to do a depreciation schedule, determine how much the structure of the building has depreciated. The most common method is straight line depreciation. We saw this back in our appraisers unit. But let's say we put an effective age of 50 years on the building. What we're saying with straight line depreciation is that each year it loses the same amount. So year one loses the same amount. It depreciates the same amount as year 2, year 5, year 12, year 48. Every single year it depreciates the same amount. And let's just say it's $1 million building. And we just said its useful life is 50 years. So when we take $1 million and divide it by 50, I get $20,000. So in this made up on the fly example, each year, every year for 50 years, this building will depreciate $20,000. Year one, it loses $20,000. Year two, it loses $20,000. It's just the simplest method for the depreciation schedule. I have taken attendance, so make sure you tell me you're back. I saw a few cameras just come on. Thank you. Thank you. When I said unit 18 was short, sweet, to the point, so not kidding. Do we see a bunch of green stars in unit 18? You can expect a question or two. Don't spend all your study time in unit 18. But look it over. Be familiar with what we discussed, because that could get you. I mean, one question could be the difference in pass or fail, you guys. One question. So the key terms are on 463. Key point review is 472. And the quiz for unit 18 is 473. Remember, within the unit 18 quiz, there's some investment math that we just looked at. Equity increase, present value, original value, profit over loss. So you got a good mix there. Usually at this point, I would stop, I would pause and ask if there are any questions. And while I still will, I want you guys going into this knowing that as far as accounting and tax deductible and tax benefits goes, y'all literally know what I know. This is it. This is my knowledge. And it's what you may see on your test. So with that understanding, do I have any questions on unit 18? I'm probably going to tell you to talk to your accountant if you do. Remember what we said too, you guys, this is about home ownership, home benefits. Remember too, you guys, your first year as an independent contractor in real estate sales, I highly recommend you talk to an accountant as an independent contractor to make sure, one, you're setting aside enough for taxes. 1099s don't withhold taxes from each check. So you want to make sure you're setting a portion of your check aside for taxes. The other thing too, as an independent contractor, there are tax deductible expenses. So for example, your mileage might be a tax deduction, any of your marketing expenses. I cannot answer those questions, but I do highly recommend you guys talk to an accountant your first year in sales, so you take advantage of everything you can. Fair enough? Okay. Now we move on to unit 16. Again, it's another short, sweet, to the point. We're getting ready to see a lot of green stars. Question or two in this unit. So we're going to go through it pretty quickly. The key to this unit is the vocabulary words. This is our basic residential construction. Let's note a few things. First off, we're not in builder school. We're not going to read this unit, be able to go out and build a house. This is just covering the basics. And the focus of this unit is residential construction. Commercial buildings tend to be built differently. So basic residential is the focus. This is our Builder 101. So our roadmap for this unit, we're going to talk about some basic architectural types, common styles that we see in residential construction. And then we're going to identify the basic components of a home, starting with the foundation and working our way up. So let's first start talking about a couple architectural types and designs. And what we're looking at here, obviously, is not all of them, all options, but it does give us a good start. First off, residential, most residential in North Carolina is wood framed, which means most residential homes in North Carolina, we use wood frame construction. The builder typically, well, it's cost effective, one. It's easier to work with. It's easier, it allows us flexibility to design. So we can have unique, different designs. Usually takes less time. And like I said, it's cost effective. Builders like wood. Who else likes wood? Or what else likes wood? Those pesky little termites. So the wood that we use to build, or the builders use to build our residential homes, are usually pre-treated. That pre-treat doesn't last forever. So it's still not a bad idea periodically to have Terminex come out, for example, do a pest inspection, maybe even consider getting some termite baits. Those little buggers can do some damage. And now we know why they like our home so much, right? We're providing them a meal with our whole home. So again, proper maintenance. Ranch style homes, all of the living is on one level. So all living is on one level. You have kitchen, living room, dining room, your bedrooms, bathrooms. Everything is on the same level. Maybe it has a basement, maybe it doesn't. That's not your main living area. It could be an additional bonus room, recreational room, maybe a garage. With split level homes, your main living is on the main level here. So your kitchen, dining room, living room. And then at some point in the home, you're going to come to an option. You go upstairs or you go downstairs. Typically, the upstairs portion of a split level is going to be your bedrooms and bathrooms. And your lower level is your below grade level. And typically that might be like a family room, a den, maybe the laundry room, some extra living area down there. Do not confuse a split level with a split foyer. A split foyer is a 2-story home. You walk in the front door and you have 2 choices. You go upstairs or you go downstairs. Split level has main living area and then the level splits. 2-story homes on the main level, you're going to mostly see kitchen, living room, dining room. Maybe your primary is on the main level. We've seen a surge of that in recent construction. I say recent, like in the last 20, 30 years. But with 2-story homes, you're going to have your bedrooms upstairs. Maybe your primary is upstairs, maybe it's downstairs. But usually speaking, living room, kitchen, dining room. And then we go upstairs for the bedrooms. And then the contemporary is a more unique design, a more unique style, sometimes catered to the homeowner. Can a house be 2 of these? Sure. Architects can do. Builders? Sure. For our purposes, this is what we got. But in the real world, could you combine all sorts of things? Absolutely. So why don't you guys answer me a question in the private chat? And looking at these 4 architectural designs, which one do you think is the most expensive to build per square foot? Of these 4, which one do you think is the most expensive to build per square foot? So I'm seeing a lot of contemporaries, and I agree, this can get really expensive really fast. Yes, especially when you start designing it yourself. Per square foot, though, usually the one that's the most expensive to build is going to be the ranch style. And here's why. When you're building a house, the 2 most expensive pieces are the roof and the foundation. And on a ranch, the whole home is on a larger foundation. The whole home is covered by one roof. A 2-story could be the same square footage of a ranch, but it's cut in half. It uses half the foundation and half of the roof. Again, the split level, we have a larger roof, but not quite as big as the ranch because we've combined this area. And then again, I mean, contemporary, those can get crazy fast. But typically per square foot, the ranch is going to be the most expensive because of the roof and the foundation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a home, basic components. We're going to take this picture and break it down into sections. So if you want to take a quick screenshot, never forget you have my PowerPoints and the online learning system. So this is in there as well. But we're going to take this and dissect it and break it down. And just like builders build, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. So starting at the bottom, the very first thing that goes into a home are our footings. It's the lowest level of construction. Think about your feet. Aren't your feet the lowest level of you? So your footings are the lowest level of construction. We're going to dig some trenches. How far down we dig depends on the area. Where are we in the world? We need to make sure that our footings go below the frost line to allow for expansion and contraction. Once we dig the trenches below the frost line, then we're going to use generally concrete to pour the footings. And on top of the footings goes our foundation. We do have a couple different types of foundation. We'll look at those next. Foundation is generally either concrete, poured concrete, brick, stone. You're looking at a brick crawl space right here. Foundation helps us provide the surface, the support for the whole home. And if you have a crawl space or a basement, for example, it's not uncommon to see piers. You can see these piers right here. This just helps offer support. We don't want sagging floors. We want years later, the foundation to help continue to support the whole weight of the home. So we build our foundation on the footing, piers if necessary. A couple different types of foundation. The crawl space is what we just looked at. The crawl space lifts the living level above the ground. It allows for ventilation, moisture control, prevention for pests. It allows you to get under the home. A basement is a story-high crawl space. A basement is a story-high crawl space. Basements are dug deeper, and it's a story high. If it's unfinished, it might be used for storage. If it's finished, we could use it for living level. And if it fits the rules, the criteria, we can count it in our total heated square foot. If the foundation is a slab, then we're just going to pour concrete right on top of the footings. We're actually going to pour it on the ground, pour it on the surface. There is no way to get under the home. It's poured right on top of the footing concrete. What type of foundation is better, is worse? It all comes down to personal preference. Some buyers want a crawl space, a basement. Some don't mind a slab. One challenge to slabs, before they pour that concrete slab, they have to have the plumbing and the electrical in place. And then they pour the concrete slab, which means once they pour it, the plumbing is where it is. So if you want to remodel your bathroom, your sink stays there. Your tub stays there. You guys with me? At least in a crawl space in a basement, you probably have access underneath. You can change that plumbing around if you want to. And a slab, it is where it is. So now what we're going to do is start to build our house. Again, we're going to start from the bottom, work our way up. So here's part of the picture you guys just saw. You can see our footings. On top of our footings go our foundation wall. The sill is the lowest horizontal piece of wood. The sill is what offers us support, offers that floor support. If you need balance or extra support, the builder may put a girder. We want homes to be level. On top of the sill or the girder goes our floor joist. The floor joist is what supports the entire weight of the floor. And what gives our floor its shape. On top of the floor joist goes our subfloor. Subflooring is usually some kind of plywood or pressed wood. What we walk on goes on the subfloor. So your carpet, laminate, tile, vinyl. So our flooring that we walk on goes on the subfloor. The subfloor is connected to the stud using a sole plate. We're going to talk about studs in just a second. But the sole plate connects the stud to the subfloor. The top plate connects the stud to the ceiling joist. Top plates on top, sole plates on bottom. Again, where the sole of your shoes. Sole of your shoes are on the bottom. Top plates on top. Studs are our vertical lumber. Studs are what gives the home its look. It's the bones, the structure. Have you guys ever heard the expression, as long as the bones are good, this building can be repaired, it can be fixed? So really what we're referring to as studs is the skeleton of the home. Today's building codes require studs to be 16 inches apart, at least 16 inches apart. However, when you're dealing with an older home, you may have different building codes. Things change over the years. The header is a horizontal piece of wood that goes over openings to offer support. So think about openings for a doorway, openings for a window. We don't want those windows and doorways to fall in on us, right? So the header stops the house from falling on our head. The header goes over those openings where doors and windows are, helps to offer support. Couple different types of framing systems, back to our studs for a second. Couple different types of framing systems. What we see most often, the most common, is a platform. That's what you're looking at here. Each floor is framed separately. So you have framing for the first floor and you have framing for the second floor. In a balloon framing system, the studs go from the foundation to the ceiling. So if this two-story home had a balloon, you'd have one really big piece or several big pieces of studs that connect from the top the whole way to the bottom. Post and beam framing systems use a different type of lumber. It's usually a lot extra large, extra big, and you can generally see it. With post and beam framing systems, think like log cabins. I tend to think of Thomas Kincaid homes, those mountain cabins where you can actually see the framing system. That may be post and beam. So moving up from our framing, we're getting into the roof and the ceiling. Again, the top plate connects the stud to the ceiling joist. The ceiling joist is what supports the weight of the roof. We hear the word support a lot when we're building a house, right? We do not want this to fall down anytime soon. So how weight is shifted, how weight is supported. Rafters are the pieces of wood that give the roof their shape. Rafters are generally like in a triangle shape. They give the roof its shape. Ridge board is the highest piece of construction. The highest point of construction is the ridge board. If the roof has an opening, for example, for a chimney or maybe a ventilation pipe, there's got to be flashing to secure the opening. We don't want moisture to get in, so we want to make sure that opening where the chimney's popping out keeps moisture and the elements away from the attic, so flashing. And then roofs often have eaves. Eaves are the pieces that kind of poke out from the home. So there's a couple components to an eave. The soffit is right here. It's usually ventilated, has a whole bunch of little holes in it to allow for ventilation. If you go outside after class and stand flat against your house and look straight up, you'll be looking at the soffit. The fascia board is at the end of the eave. The fascia board is what we connect the gutters to. Another big part of home building is keeping moisture away from it. We want to keep the home dry. A lot of what we're looking at here is to help keep moisture away, direct the rain and the moisture away from the property. Water's only good for living things, you guys. Water's not good for a home. And then the freeze board can also offer ventilation. But the freeze board is usually the decorative piece. We usually can see that from the street. So it gives its home its look. Questions on our basic framing construction. Oh, so very basic. By the way, as agents, we need this basic knowledge because I'm here to tell you guys, buyers point at stuff and say, what's that? What's this do? So having this basic understanding. Questions so far? Continuing to build our home, we got to put some walls up, specifically exterior walls. Sheathing is going to be added to the framing to give the wall its wall look. These are usually particle board, plywood. Exterior siding, what we see from the street, we attach to the sheathing. Exterior siding can be vinyl, brick, stone, EIFS. The exterior siding is attached to the home either using tar paper, which is the old school way of doing it, or the more modern method is house wrap. What you're looking at in this picture is house wrap. So we put the sheathing up, give the wall its look, then we put the house wrap up, and to that we can add our exterior siding. Siding not only gives the home its look, it also helps keep the elements away, protect that sheathing. You don't want moisture to get to it. Homes have windows. We have a couple different types of windows. Sliding windows means a panel moves. Maybe a panel moves up and down, maybe it moves side to side. Sliding windows, there's a panel, a sash that slides vertically or horizontally. Swinging windows open out. They usually have a crank, and you crank them out. When you're done with your windows, you crank them back closed. Fixed windows don't open. Fixed windows are your picture windows. They're there for decorative purposes. That's what you're looking at here in the picture, is a fixed window or a picture window. The components to a window: the window sill is the lowest, the bottom piece of the window. The jamb are the sides. The header is the top. The window sash is the piece of the window that moves. Again, it either moves up and down or back and forth. So you can open your window, let the fresh air in. Muttons and mullions are not words I made up to make sure you guys are paying attention. They are real world words. Muttons and mullions are the dividing panels of the window. So your muttons are your horizontal pieces, your mullions are your vertical pieces. Just those cross hatches, those dividing panes. Muttons are your horizontal pieces, mullions are your vertical. Homes also have doors. Your interior doors are different than your exterior doors. Exterior doors meaning they lead to the outside. Interior mean they lead to another room in the house. Your interior doors are a lot less secure than your exterior doors. We want something secure, the outside, thicker, solid, help keep you safe. Flush doors have a smooth finish. Panel doors are what you're looking at right here. They have indented spaces, indented panels. Sliding glass doors open back to forth. They generally lead outside to a patio or a deck. window doors that slide open. And then your French doors are usually an interior door, more upscale decorative door. We sometimes see French doors leading from the kitchen to the formal dining room, for example. Good news about doors and windows, the components are the same. So the sill is the bottom, the jamb is the sides, the header is the top. Questions on doors or windows? Anybody thinking about going into building, developing? Anybody already there? Kind of, maybe. It's interesting. It's really interesting what all goes in and building a house. It's not as easy as one might think. A lot to take into consideration. Move on, talk about roofing. On top of the rafters go the decking. Decking, again, is usually some kind of plywood, particle board. Put it on the rafters. It gives it this flat look. Shingles go on the decking. Shingles go on the decking using roofing felt, which is some kind of tar paper. So you put the decking down, you put the roofing felt down, and then you put the shingles. Most common for shingles, we see an asphalt or fiberglass maybe. You guys see our shingles in this picture. You see how they're pointed down? Again, that's meant to direct rain and moisture away from the home. We don't want it settling. We don't want it sitting. So the shingles are designed that way, help keep moisture, water, rain flowing down into the gutters. The gutters pull the rain away from the home. The pitch is the slope of the roof. How steep is the roof? If you will, page 428, we have a couple of different roof designs. The gable is the most common that we see in North Carolina. That's our triangle shape. The hip just has 4 sides that come in. The gable just has the 2. The hip has the outside sides there. Sometimes on gable roofs or hip roofs, you might see a dormer, just those little windows on top. That's probably a buyer's favorite question. Impress your buyer and say, that's a dormer. Sometimes you can access those little windows. Sometimes they're just there for decorative purposes. A salt box roof is a big slope in the back. For a salt box roof, think of like a 1.5 story home. So you may have half of a second level. The flat roof is mostly what we see for commercial construction. Remember, we said commercial is built differently than residential. So the flat roof is mostly what we see for commercial. Obviously, the big thing with the flat roof is there's got to be some form of drainage. We can't have all that water just sitting up there on the roof. Commercial buildings, it's not uncommon to find your AC units, your heating units on the roof. Again, the key is drainage. When building homes, we need to consider insulation. The old school method for insulation were those bats, we just kind of rolled them out. Today, we're playing around with new forms of insulation. Loose fill is blowing the insulation in. That's what we see the Pink Panther doing here. They'll blow the insulation in the place they want and it'll harden. We're also seeing foam insulation these days. So you spray it in, it expands just a bit, and then it hardens. Another form of insulation is weather stripping. We use weather stripping around exterior doors and windows. Help keep that little breeze away, help keep critters out, pests out. Have you guys ever sat in a really, really old house and you notice the curtains kind of blowing? Could probably use some weather stripping. Moisture control, absolutely in the attic with our insulation. Again, ventilation is probably the #1 thing we can do to prevent moisture. Have proper ventilation in the attic, crawl space, and basement. Insulation comes in different values. The value for an insulation is the R value. This is our resistance to heat and cold, resistance to the elements. The more susceptible to the elements, the higher the R value. So our ceiling R value, the minimum requirement right now for building codes is 30. Walls and floors, not as high. Obviously, you can have a higher R value. Again, this is just the minimum requirement. If you go up into the mountains where it's colder, you may have a higher R value. Again, it's resistance to heat and cold, to the elements, the extreme. Most homes built today have some kind of heating air conditioning system. The most common one is our HVAC. It's a combination of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. It's kind of like a 2-for-1. You get heat or AC. Your HVAC can be powered, maybe electricity, natural gas, depending on your location, solar panels, various sources to power our HVAC system. If we're not using, if we don't have an HVAC system, maybe it's an older home that doesn't have an HVAC system, for example, some other heating sources just to provide heat. In older homes, you may see a central forced warm air. Central forced warm air forces the air through the home as opposed to pumping it. Gravity warm air does not have any kind of duct system. It's a central furnace. The furnace is centrally located and the heat penetrates from that central source. Electric baseboards, we're not seeing as much today, but they're still out there in older homes. Runs along the baseboard, plug it in, and it generates heat. Space heating systems could be wood stoves, kerosene heaters, radiators. Radiators are those things that look like a big coil. Those suckers get hot. Have you ever tried to touch one of those? You only do it once, won't you? And then growing in popularity today is solar heating, using the sun's energy to provide us with heating. A solar heating system could be centralized just to the one home. You may notice solar panels on somebody's roof. What they're doing is capturing the energy from the sun to heat their home. You may also see a solar farm in which is capturing energy for an area. My Winston-Salem people, go out Clemensville Road, out there close to Hobby Park, kind of between Stratford Road and Ebert or Ebert, depending on where you're from in the world. In that area, there's a huge solar farm, fairly recent. It's not that old. You guys driven out and seen that sucker yet? It's huge. That's capturing energy from the sun. Again, if we don't have an HVAC system, we may also see a separate air conditioning system. So you could, again, have central force air, forcing the cool air throughout the home. We don't have heat pump or central air. You may have window units, help cool it down. Those things have come a long way as well. My AC quit last July. Why didn't that ever happen in like October, right? Okay, so it quit in July. I rallied a couple AC units, not window units, but AC units. So back to our HVAC, the combination system, the heat pump, again, is what we're seeing in most new construction today. So the heat pump with the HVAC system. Heat is measured by BTUs, British thermal units. The measure of heat, how much of a system do we need? One thing we've seen in the last, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years in new construction, particularly with two-story homes, is a dual heating system. So you may have two units, one for the main level and a smaller one for the upper level. We all know heat rises, right? And if you have a two-story home and only one unit, that thing is working hard to keep the upper level heated or the lower level heated. So now it's not uncommon to see dual units. If you're working with a buyer and showing property, a couple things to look out for. First off, when you walk outside, you're going to see two units. But another big indication that it's got a solar or a dual heating, you got two thermostats, one on the first floor and one on the second. So you can regulate heat better per level, saves greatly on your power bill, your energy bill. Questions? Heat and air conditioning systems? So the last little piece is just a reminder about our government regulations. North Carolina Uniform Residential Building Codes gives builders the minimum building codes, the minimum construction standards. And with the minimum construction standards, the main focus is safety. Obviously, builders can do more than the minimum. But these building codes set the floor, if you will. HUD may have different requirements than North Carolina Uniform Residential Building Codes. If you're going for an FHA or a VA loan, for example, because they're government backed, HUD may have different standards, higher standards than the building codes. And then for most big projects, such as building or major renovations, a general contractor is required. General contractor license is a separate class, a separate test, separate thing. Does anybody remember back from unit early on, 3 or 5, doesn't matter. But we talked about our building codes. And we said, if your project is more than X amount, a general contractor is required. Does anybody remember what that X amount is? Woo, we're going way back to like day 1 or 2, aren't we? Early. Does anybody remember what that? If your project is anything, look at you guys go. If the project's more than anything, X amount, then a GC is required. Yeah. Anything more than 30,000, we need a general contractor. Celebrate the small wins, absolutely. Anything more than 30,000, a general contractor is required. And they're just going to help organize the thing. Because now we got subcontractors, right? We probably got plumbers and electricians and flooring guy and painting guy and framing guy and or gal. So the GC just helps coordinate it all. Knows who to schedule when. Questions? Again, another Green Star unit. Basic understanding, 1 or 2 test questions. We're not spending all of our study time in unit 16, but we are going to look it over before our test so we can get that extra question or 2. So those key terms are on page 421. Key point reviews on 431. And your student quiz is on 432. So this is where we are. Thursday, when we come together, we are going to Kahoot. We get to do a Kahoot for 17 and 19. 17 was our appraisal unit. 19 was our fair housing. And then once we Kahoot, we jump into license law and commission rule. Specifically, our main focus being the comments. We introduced this to you guys back in unit 7. I did ask you guys to please start looking ahead. The comments is where we're starting. This is the big section of your state exam. So we'll talk about what that means on Thursday. We'll start going through the comments, other state specific stuff that we will get to. And that's the last big section, license law and commission rule. So we'll start that on Thursday. We won't get through it. We won't have that much more to do Tuesday. So before we leave on Thursday, we'll talk about what next week looks like. And then we're done. Y'all believe that? I know, right? I always feel like I just met you guys. Was it not yesterday? I was saying, oh. Now here we are getting ready to say bye. See you in post licensing. Questions, comments? All right. You have a good day today, good day tomorrow. We'll see you first thing Thursday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Bye. Thank you.